I want to underscore some points that were made by the chairman and by Senator Murray. First of all, we have already made $1 trillion in cuts to discretionary spending as a way to begin to approach the deficit. And as the chairman pointed out, we're at the lowest percentage of discretionary spending since the 1950s. So the issue of out-of-control spending has to be put in the context of deep cuts already and the lowest percentage of discretionary spending for all of these programs in 60 years. But the point I think the chairman made is very well taken, which is when you listen to our Republican colleagues, they're talking about exempting defense. They're talking about no revenue, which means that the 7.8% cut you're talking about is probably closer to 15%. And the worst case plans that are frightening at this moment become absolutely horrible. But the point I want to make, Mr. Secretary, is that when you get down to the education situation, at the local level, they're already suffering. States are also trying to deal with this dilemma. So we will be doubling down on our cuts at a time when state and localities are facing similarly difficult cuts. Can you give us the context from both those convergence, local pressures, and a huge, in fact, probably doubling down of cuts?
It's a great point. And as I talk to educators who have been in the business, been working with children for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, many from across the country say this is the toughest economic climate they've ever worked in, more constrained resources. We were thrilled with the Recovery Act to save a couple 100,000 jobs, but we also lost a couple 100,000 jobs across this country. And with class size going up, after-school programs being eliminated, some school districts going to 4-day weeks rather than 5-day weeks, art, dance, drama, music, PE going away, early childhood cutbacks. None of these things are good for children or good for education or ultimately good for our country. So you're exactly right. In the midst of a very, very tough economic time, 40 states last year, 80% of the country, Republican, Democrat, 40 states cut funding to higher education. Again, we're trying to lead the world in college graduation rates. That doesn't help us get where we need to go. So at the early childhood level, the K-12 level, at the higher ed level, these are very, very, very difficult economic times. And to compound those challenges, to compound those difficulties is inconceivable to me.
In effect, what we're doing is not only in the short run shedding significant number of jobs. I don't have the exact numbers, but we've seen private employment grow consistently over the last several years under the President's programs. But what we've seen after the Recovery Act was exhausted is public sector employment shrink dramatically, particularly in education. Yeah. And that would accelerate, presumably, if these cuts went through and, moreover, were doubled because we've exempted defense. Yeah. So you lose in the short run, you lose jobs, which means the economy continues to languish. But the longer run, I think all of your efforts, the race to the top, commendable efforts, all your tough calls about how do we reform education will be lost. And rather than sort of trying to catch up with the Chinas, the Indias, et cetera, we'll fall, in your view, let me ask you, further and further behind.
I think that's exactly right. And again, at a time when we have to get better, faster, despite the tough economic times, we can't afford to go in the opposite direction. We can't afford to do that.
Yeah. Just a final point is that, as my colleagues have pointed out, Secretary Rice, as you've pointed out, Secretary Rice, military leaders, everyone talks about, this is now a global competition for the best educated people in the world. If we lose that competition, then our fundamental sort of foundation in national security will quickly erode. And we won't invent the new technologies. We won't have the sophisticated military and associated personnel to use it. And essentially, not just in terms of national security, but in terms of the fabric of our country, it will deteriorate.
That's exactly right. If I could just quickly add, Mr. Chairman, that I know our children are as talented, as creative, as entrepreneurial, as innovative as children anywhere in the world. I just want to level a playing field for them. I just want to give them a chance to fulfill their potential. And if we fail to give them the chance to fulfill their academic and social potential, shame on us.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.